Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a Christmas card for you guys with this beautiful large Santa die which is the focal point of our card, and it is paired with a very delicate Merry Christmas sentiment. For my background I will be using vellum to tone down that very bright and beautiful blue on the embossed panel. Well, I did use the blackout technique for my background panel here. Before we get started, I would really appreciate if you could take a minute to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so that you get notified each time I post a new video. Let us first take a look at the die set that I will be using as the main focal point for our card today. This is the Santa Claus Wafer die by Simon's Time. Well, I think this was actually part of one of Simon's card kits. Now, this die comes as a set of two. We have an outline layer, which is also the base layer for our Santa, and we have a piece which cuts out each component of our Santa's face. This would not just be perfect for your focal points, for your card fronts, but also would be absolutely stunning. And I like the size for Christmas tags for your gifts and also as Christmas ornaments. Now I will be using some specialty cardstocks to create our Santa. First, here I have the Snow White Positively Velvet Luxury cardstock. This would be a beautiful addition to the beard and part of Santa's hat. For that, you could also use some sparkle white paper, but I absolutely love the feel and texture on this paper. Next, we have some shiny red and silver cardstock by Your Paper Insider. Now off camera, I used all of these beautiful cardstocks to cut out those little die cut pieces. I like to store these pieces in this funnel tray by Cat Scrappiness. For my base layer, I use some heavyweight white cardstock, which is also what I used for Santa's face. I will be adding very light hint of color on the beard and parts of the hat, and for my face, I will be using some MELON Positively Saturated ink. Now I'm using my liquid glue to adhere all of these pieces onto our base layer, and then I will be using some foam tape to pop up this piece onto the card front. I started by adding the slightest hint of blue on all of those velvet die cut pieces. For the face of Santa, I used the Simon's Stamp Positively Saturated ink in the shade Melon. Putting the pieces together is more like putting pieces of a puzzle together. I started with Santa's beard. Before I could stick the face, I decided to add a little more blue on the beard. I lightly tapped my brush onto the marine ink pad and then very light-handedly brushed over the beard to give a shadow effect. I then stuck all of the pieces one by one using my Barely Art liquid glue. For the eyes of Santa, I cut out a little piece of black cardstock and stuck it behind the face. I used the same melon ink for Santa's nose. You could also use masking tape on your specialty cardstocks before die cutting parts of the face. That would literally turn all of those little die cut pieces into stickers, which would make it really easy to stick them onto the base layer. Well, even better, you could die cut these base layer along with a layer of masking tape. But I like to use my liquid glue since I feel it gives a lot more control on placing the little die cut pieces exactly where they belong. You get a lot of wiggle room since all of these pieces are really tiny. Here's a closer look at our Santa. I really love how this turned out, and look at that little tiny sparkles on his face. I feel that is absolutely perfect and adds the exact amount of shine and glitter on our card. Now that our focal point is ready, let's work on the card background. I decided to use an embossing folder for the background of this card project. I have the FACETED Snowflakes embossing folder. Now this is a 3D embossing folder which gives a beautiful deeply etched snowflake design on the entire panel. I used an A2 size white cardstock and ran this panel along with the embossing folder through my die cut machine. Since I decided to use the blackout technique on this embossing panel, I will flip the panel and use the deboss side where the snowflakes are etched into the panel. Now, the blackout technique is one of my absolute favorite techniques. It is one of the easiest way to add a lot of depth and dimension to your card. All you have to do is swipe your ink pad over your embossed panel. I prefer using any of the dark colors or shades of ink for this technique. You could also add color to those etched embossed snowflakes, but I decided to keep it white and just add the bright blue shade for my background. I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated ink in the shade Galaxy, which is a very deep, vibrant blue. The contrast between the white and blue is absolutely stunning. To take it a step further, instead of directly adhering my focal point onto this embossed panel, I decided to add a sheet of vellum. Vellum will not just tone down this bright blue background, but will also be a beautiful divide between our background and the focal point. I wrapped the sheet of vellum around the front of the panel, leaving approximately half-inch border on each side of the panel. I feel that the addition of vellum not just pops the focal point, but also takes your eyes to your snowflake background. Now, before I adhere my focal point onto the card front, I went ahead and stamped the Merry Christmas sentiment from the Peaceful Tree stamp set onto a piece of black cardstock. I used white embossing powder for the sentiment. I like to use a coffee filter to hold all of that extra embossing powder that falls off. Well, a very important step not to forget while you're heat embossing is to use your anti-static powder tool. Usually I prefer using gold embossing powder on any of the black or dark color cardstock. But since our snowflake is white on our background panel, I decided to go with white embossing powder instead. I used the coordinating dies to cut out the sentiment. I also cut out two additional set of sentiments using plain black cardstock. I like to stack up these die cut pieces to add dimension on my sentiment strip rather than adding foam strips. Now, especially since our sentiment is so delicate, I prefer having the stacked sentiments. Now for that, I'm using my Barely Art liquid glue. Now that our focal point and our sentiment strip is ready, all we have to do is assemble these onto our card front. I used some foam tape to pop up the Santa focal point on this card front, and using liquid glue, I adhered this already dimensional sentiment strip on the panel. Then, using some liquid glue, I adhered this onto a side folding A2 size note card. You could also use some double-sided tape to adhere the panel, but since this is an embossed panel, I like to use liquid glue or foam tape for that extra grip. Here's a look at our finished card. I absolutely love how this turned out. Take a look at that velvety beard and those little tiny sparkles on the beard. Off camera, I also adhered some sequences, that was the Simon Says Stamp Positively Dazzling Gems Prism. Now, I absolutely love how this card turned out and how easy it was to create. You could also use that little Santa focal point on your tags and also as Christmas ornaments. I hope you enjoyed watching the video and got inspired. All the supplies that I used will be linked down in the description box below. All of these links are affiliate links, which means that if you shop using one of those links, I get a small commission at no cost to you guys. Thank you again for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe.